Hello everybody and welcome to the Shalom Hartman Institute in Jerusalem. I'm Alan Abbey and tonight we have our fourth and final webinar of the holiday webinar series which has been running since the beginning of the Hebrew calendar year. Tonight we are with Dr. Ruth Calderon, who is a research fellow at the Hartman Institute, and we'll tell you a little bit more about Ruth in a minute. I want to thank you all for being with us all year, and I'm hoping that and of course in the fall we'll start with a new series, but I'm hoping that we will see you before then, and by that I mean that summer many of you will come to our RTS, Rabbinic Torah Study Seminar this summer here in Jerusalem. There are a few slots left, and I know many of the people who watch this program have come to RTS in the past. We would like to invite you this year, and especially because tonight's program with Ruth Calderon is in fact a warm-up for the summer theme. The summer theme encompasses our research and thoughts on the major calendar anniversaries of 2017. That's 1917, the Balfour Declaration, 1947, the UN vote to partition Israel, the Palestine into Jewish and Arab states, and of course 1967, the Six-Day War and its aftermath. And that is the theme for the summer. So tonight's program with Dr. Ruth Calderon in honor of Yom HaAtzmaut is a perfect lead-in to it. Let me just tell you a little bit about Dr. Ruth Calderon. She is a research fellow at the Hartman Institute and one of the leading figures in Israel, spearheading efforts to revive Hebrew culture and pluralistic Israeli Jewish identity. She has founded several interesting organizations and programs that are still in operation, including Alma in Tel Aviv, which is now, we're very happy to say, part of the Hartman Institute. And for those of you who may remember, she was a member of the Knesset in the 2013-2015 Knesset as a member of the Yesh Atid party, where she electrified the world with her opening speech, which involved some Talmud study, and I think many people have remembered that. Tonight, again, let me tell you Dr. Calderon's topic is the Israeli Identity Challenge, the public sphere in a Jewish democratic state. And one final program note, of course, as always, we invite you to send your questions to us either by email or on our Facebook page, and we will read as many of them at the end of the talk as possible. The program will last about 1 hour. And now, without any further delay, Dr. Ruth Calderon.
Thank you. And shalom, everyone. It's not easy to speak to a camera, but I believe you're out there. And thank you for joining us and being with us. It feels very right to speak about Yom HaAtzmaut, Independence Day, not alone only with Israelis, but with fellow Jews wherever you are in the world. And I'll try to start from the simple fact that I want to say about myself, that I am a Zionist. And today it's not a simple thing to say, and Zionism is kind of lo b'moda, not the thing you say about yourself, but I am a Zionist, and in Zionism I belong, or I follow spiritual Zionism, which is a term that Echad Ha'am, Asher Ginsburg, what do you do with the term? Founded or coined? Coined. Spiritual Zionism, as opposed to the political Zionism of Herzl, where Benjamin Ze'ev Herzl wanted to find a solution for the Jews that were in threat and felt that we must have a Jewish state and a homeland, so the Jews will have an answer and a place to live. Echad Ha'am, Asher Ginsburg, felt that we don't only need to save the Jews, but we also need to save Judaism. And he felt at the time, and I think in many ways it could be right for us today too, that Judaism itself needs to find a way to be connected again to the Jews, to find a way to think about it in a new way, to do some kind of a midrash on it, to bring out a way that it will be relevant and important and alive again for the Jews in the world. And out of that concept of spiritual Zionism, we have on our website an article by Echad Ha'am where he says that maybe the major thing of those first Zionists, the Zionist group that is around him, were Bialik and Weizmann and many of the important streets in Tel Aviv, Feierberg, Ravnitsky, and so on. They are in a group called Bnei Moshe, which is a kind of a secret group, and they are founding what they believe is a revival, or kind of a revolution in Zionist in the way that they are Jews and in the way that they understand Zionism. And the first thing that they do, or the most important theme that they try to raise, and Echad Ha'am is the prophet of that concept, is nationality. It is the time where most of the other nations become more aware of their nationality and talking about nation states. And he believes that the Jews also need a nation state. And he says in that article that you can read, or maybe you all read before, he says that the big difference of his time, and again I want to say that maybe it is relevant for our generation today, is that as opposed to biblical Judaism, where people felt that they are part of some kind of a whole, some kind of a big nation, and the good of the nation is what is important for them, and they're willing to give some of their effort, some of their power, some of their life for the good of the general people of Israel, Klal Israel. He says that in his time in Europe, what he sees in the diaspora is that many of the Jews, and he's talking about it historically, are thinking about their own private life and private good, or their community is good, and the thought about the big general good of the people of Israel as one whole is lacking. Now, maybe that is one of the big differences between Jews living in Israel and Jews living abroad. That those people, Echad Ha'am and Herzl, of course, tried to build here, and we are now celebrating almost 69 years of this quite amazing revolution in Jewish life, that they tried to have sovereignty, Ribonut, Jewish sovereignty in the state of Israel. And many things, you know, when we talk about Israel and we are celebrating or are proud about the state, there are many things that usually people talk about, the strong army, the economy, startups, and so on. But I want to focus on something else that is the heritage of this group of spiritual Zionists, and that is the formation of a public space that is completely Jewish, but is civil or secular, as opposed to a religious public space that you can see in very ultra-Orthodox, either in the shtetl at one point or in very ultra-Orthodox communities today too. So the concept that in their time was completely a dream, and today is something that we live in, we are marinated in, we are enveloped by, is a Jewish street, and I am a Tel Avivian, so I feel Tel Aviv is a very good example of it. Public space, street, that is not religious or not following religious laws, but at the same time, at the same time, is very deeply, richly Jewish. And I mean now in Yom HaAtzmaut or before Yom HaAtzmaut, wherever you stop in a traffic light, there are children trying to sell flags for the car that always fly out when you open your window, so you can buy another one. Television, the radio, when in music they will select the best song of the year, and on television they will try to sum up what happened this year and the 69 years. Everything will be blue and white. The songs that you hear on the radio the public space, there are flags everywhere, in all the streets and in all the schools, and the day of Independence Day and the Memorial Day, the day before, everybody is wearing a white button-down shirt, and there are many symbols of a holiday or the Jewish calendar that are not celebrated inside a private home or in a synagogue, but are very significantly noticed in the public space. And that concept that I like to call the Jewish snow globe, like the snow globe of tourists, when that's the only snow that we have here. But the Jewish snow globe, meaning we live in a kind of a snow globe. The state of Israel is a cultural globe where you grow up in something that is very deeply or richly Jewish. You go to school, the school is Jewish, the public school is Jewish, the calendar, we count the month following the Jewish month. You celebrate all the holidays, and you don't work. Whether you are religious or not, you go to shul or not, the holidays come and kind of hug you, whether you are going to look for them or not. The same thing happens for Shabbat. The street name will be Jewish or coming out of the Jewish, either the books or the great people or symbols or something like that. Your own name is usually out of the books. The graffiti on the streets will be kind of many times taking some old known phrase. For Yom HaAtzmaut, we can again remind ourselves of a graffiti of Herzl, the Benjamin Zev Herzl profile with a beard. And we all learn in school that he said, Im tirtzu en zo agada, if you would wish it, it will not be a legend. And the graffiti says, לא רוצים, לא צריך. You don't wish it, so it won't happen. And the graffiti is only funny because whoever painted it at night knows that everyone that is going to look at it in the market have gone to school and kindergarten and youth movement and heard again and again the Herzl famous phrase. So everything is happening in Hebrew. The calendar is aligned with, like, you are praying for rain when rain actually is really going to come. You celebrate the season of harvest when harvest actually happens. That feeling of being in the right place, in the land of Israel where our story was told in Jewish time, and living in the Jewish language, and knowing that you are part of the big story and you are taking it one step forward. That makes life in Israel, I feel, very meaningful. And even if your private life is private and simple, and so, you're not a big hero, you feel that you take part in something that is really big and significant. And because the country is really a small shtetl and very small, you can also affect the ongoing story, and you can make a difference. You can call important people and they will answer their cell phones. You are a player in the big Jewish play. And that snow globe, meaning the fact that not only the synagogue is Jewish and not only my home is Jewish, but outside the public space is Jewish, I feel is the biggest in my life, or my most cherished achievement of Zionism of the last 69 years. The fact that I can be Jewish and be reminded that I'm Jewish and feel that my Jewishness is rich and enriching my life without working very hard in it, because I'm supported by the snow globe, the teachers, the television people, the radio people, there's the soundtrack of Friday afternoon on the radio is not like Thursday afternoon. And the soundtrack of television in a holiday it will be different from a simple day. And it's like it's supporting you. If you forget that it's Friday, you walk on the street and you see that there's less traffic and the shops are beginning to close, then you even feel like the birds are singing a special song. For Friday, you live in a Jewish public space. So that's the achievement. But with this achievement comes a challenge, something that makes life here, we don't say difficult, we say challenging, learning from American culture. And that is the fact that when it is public Jewish space, it belongs to all the Jews that live together here. And they, as Jews go, have different opinions on how should the public space be run or be ruled and so on. So we just finished Passover, Pesach, and there's a big debate about whether in cafes in Tel Aviv, chametz, bread, can be seen, or should there be a law that restricts any showing of anything that is gluten or any carbohydrates in the public space. Now, and North American people don't think of the concept, but when there is a law that forbids bread on Passover, that means that they will be, פקחים. There will be like policemen, not from the police, but there will be people that will come to each coffee house and will look if there is bread and will find the people that are running the cafe. And that gives people like me a very sour kind of feeling, because I feel very bad when religion is ruled by the law. And I feel that my choice to not eat bread on Passover and eat matzot is only a choice if I can choose. And if there's no bread to be found, there's not even an option to choose to not eat bread. In the same way, the question of Yom HaAtzmaut, Independence Day, the question of the national anthem, the question of flags and so on, it's always presenting some kind of a big debate. On Independence Day, the non-Jewish citizens of Israel will say, how can I celebrate Independence Day if it is the day of the Nakba, or this is not my flag, or this is not my national anthem? And it is because this connection between nationalism and a religion and a nation state and minorities, I think more than it is known in North America, the difficult part of having this rich Jewish public space is how to run it when you only have one space. There's no option to say, you know what, you want to do it in a reform way, you'll do it in one room. I want to do it in a conservative or secular or orthodox way, I'll do it in the other room, and then we'll meet for coffee afterwards. Here, it's either this or that. It's very difficult to do. I mean, the shops are either open or closed. You can't have them open and closed on Shabbat at the same time. There either is bread or there's no bread. You sing this national anthem, maybe we could add another one, but usually when you fulfill this dream of having sovereignty and building a home, like in a private home, if you have dinner, you have to decide if it's pizza or salad. I mean, sometimes you can have both, but not for every one of the family that would like to eat differently. In one home, you have to make compromises and you have to make decisions that are usually not what each one of the voices wanted, but something in the middle. By the way, the political framework of Israeli politics is built on coalition because it wants people to negotiate and find solutions that would be compromised, rather than one side wins it all and decides how the public space will be for everyone. As you see, if you watch our parliament, our Knesset, it's very challenging. And from the outside, I understand that we look like we can't play together and there's fighting all the time, but I wanted to point out that the challenge of deciding this is the Jewish homeland, and it is a homeland for all the Jews in the world, and all the Jews and non-Jews that live in Israel. Now we have to, rather than have many different solutions that different synagogues will do for themselves, we have to do one thing together, and that leaves many of us, in many of the cases, feeling that some of our wish did not realize. I need a bit of water. Now, in order to solve this or to go forward with this, because I'm very much living in the present and want to think what I can bring as a present to my beloved state, to her 69th birthday, to be better and to be more right for all its citizens and for all the Jews in the world. I feel that something that was promised in the Declaration of Independence was that in a few months Constitution will be written and given out. A promise that was not kept because there was no agreement, and until today we live without a constitution. The lack of a constitution makes what I tried to explain, this Jewish snow globe, or the state of Israel, the cultural life, makes it very challenging because there's no clear values that everybody agrees on. And so when we talk about a Jewish and democratic state, I very much try to give a lot of power to the end, Jewish and democratic, because usually people either stand on the Jewish side or the democratic side, and there is a tension between the two sides. And I will try in a minute to give my hope for how we and you can bring about some future in which we will have a constitution. That is my vision and hope, but it might take a while. Before, I'm just trying to count my time, I wanted to speak a little bit about the Declaration of Independence, which was, when I was a member of Knesset, I felt that the question of the identity of the state, although it is 69, is still a very unsolved and important, in my view, the most important issue that there's no agreement on in Israel. And there are competing legislations that are still on the table of the Knesset. One is called Chok HaLe'om, the nation law, that is trying to kind of take the place of that constitution that was never agreed on, or yet was not agreed on yet, and try to solve the question of how do you hold both sides of Israel's identity as a Jewish nation state and as a democratic state for all its citizens. And that legislation, in my view, in my eyes, was dangerous and scared me, because the way I read it, it was trying to, instead of balance democratic and Jewish, was trying to choose the Jewish side, and in any place of tension try to rule in favor of the Jewish side of Israel's identity as opposed to the democratic side. And so I tried to come up with a better legislation, better wording. And I did what we do when we think rabbinically, Jewishly, and I went back to the last text that we agreed on. And with the some help from Professor Moshe Halbertal. We discussed it together, and the idea of taking the Declaration of Independence that was agreed on the night before Israel was formed as a state, and take that text to be the preface of our wants-to-be constitution, and take the values of the Declaration of Independence and use it as the something that will be a base that all of us can stand on. And we chose the Declaration of Independence because in the Declaration, and you have it in your text, I want to, maybe you'll help me read a paragraph in English. I'll read it in Hebrew for the honor of Hebrew, and then we'll read it in English. This phrase of מתוך קשר היסטורי ומסורתי זה, חתרו היהודים בכל דור לשוב ולהיאחז במולדתם העתיקה, ובדורות האחרונים שבו לארצם בהמונים, וחלוצים, מעפילים ומגינים, הפריחו נשמות, החיו שפתם העברית, בנו כפרים וערים, והקימו יישוב גדל והולך השליט על משקו ותרבותו. שוחר שלום ומגן על עצמו, מביא ברכה וקדמה לכל תושבי הארץ, ונושא נפשו לעצמאות ממלכתית.
Impelled by this historic and traditional attachment, Jews strove in every successive generation to re-establish themselves in their ancient homeland. In recent decades, they returned in masses. Pioneers, mapilim, immigrants, coming to Eretz Israel in defiance of restrictive legislation. And defenders, they made deserts bloom, revived the Hebrew language, built villages and towns, and created a thriving community controlling its own economy and culture, loving peace, but knowing how to defend itself, bringing the blessings of progress to all the country's inhabitants, and aspiring toward independent nationhood.
There's some part of this text that is very naive, and in post-colonialist critique, they can tear it apart. But I want to read it in a clean, naive way and notice what was the concept and what they tried to do. First, I want to point out on the first connection of these two words, history ומסורתי, historic and traditional. Historic meaning the Jewish history and Jewish tradition. And, history ומסורתי. History is more the history in a kind of a political way of a nation wanting to have a homeland and to live a free life. And Masorati, traditional, it's like the Jewish and the political, the Jewish and the democratic. And I want to put, you can read afterwards when we'll translate it, an article I wrote about the Vav, the end, the Vav that connects the historic and the traditional. And they talk about Moladetam, their homeland, what the concept of a nation state is the way we were taught is, first of all, maybe it's not first of all, the history and the culture, then the language, the Hebrew language, and then the territory, the Eretz Israel, the state, the land that we return to. I said in the opening of my remarks that saying that I'm a Zionist today is not very popular. I want to say that even saying that I'm a nationalist, that my Judaism is a nationality, I know that it rubs an American ear, not in the wrong way, but a little bit, not with the fur, but against the fur, because nationalism today is connected to, right-wing fascism and so on. I want to talk about clean, fair, belonging to a nation, which I feel that I belong and I believe in. And when I say that I'm a national Jew, and that is that spiritual Zionism, I mean that connecting to the land is very important to me, that the Hebrew language, and again, I know that this is a challenge for North American Jews, but I must say that I'm a great believer that people that master, Jews that master Hebrew will not lose their Jewishness. I can't prove it at this point, but I'm a great believer in that. And when I talk to Israeli Americans, and we all well know that there's almost 1 million Israeli Americans today, I believe that Hebrew would be an amazingly important anchor of their evolving identity that is now taking place, and they are still challenged and looking for you as leaders to reach out to them and find a way to live together. So I believe that Hebrew is a very important part of it. Connecting to the land is a very important part. The history and tradition, of course, is a very important part. And taking the tradition as in study the great books of Hebrew culture and the calendar, the holidays, the traditions, the symbols, the famous heroes, all of that, to receive it from the past, to own it, to allow ourselves to change whatever needs to be changed in order for it to be relevant and real for us, and then to try and transmit it to the next generation. So I tried, as I said before, to legislate that this Declaration of Independence will be accepted as a preface to the Constitution that I hope we will once have. And I found a lot of resistance. I couldn't get a majority in the Knesset for the declaration. And the reason that I could not find enough partners was the fact that in the declaration it says, and again I will read a little bit in Hebrew and we'll read it in English. It begins here. I need... I'm looking for complete equality. Something that comes before this. Oh, maybe it's two sides. רגע. הנה, I hope. Anyway, I'll read what I have here from my memory. It says that Israel will give complete equality to all citizens with no difference, בלי הבדל דת, גזע ומין, with no difference of race, gender, and religion. And I'm sorry, I can't find it, maybe we'll find it in a minute, and we'll have complete freedom of religion and freedom of speech and so on. Oh, here, I think I have it. Sorry. מדינת ישראל, it's here. תהא פתוחה לעלייה יהודית ולקיבוץ גלויות. תשקוד על פיתוח הארץ לטובת כל תושביה, all its citizens. תהא מושתתת על יסודות החירות, הצדק והשלום לאור חזונם של נביאי ישראל. תקיים שוויון זכויות חברתי ומדיני גמור לכל אזרחיה בלי הבדל דת, גזע ומין. תבטיח חופש דת, מצפון, לשון, חינוך ותרבות. תשמור על המקומות הקדושים של כל הדתות ותהיה נאמנה לעקרונותיה של מגילת האומות המאוחדות.
So,
you should guess which word makes it difficult to have a coalition.
Okay, we'll read it in English for those who didn't get all of the Hebrew. The state of Israel will be open for Jewish immigration and for the ingathering of the exiles. It will foster the development of the country for the benefit of all its inhabitants. It will be based on freedom, justice, and peace as envisaged by the prophets of Israel. It will ensure complete equality of social and political rights to all its inhabitants, irrespective of religion, race, or sex. It will guarantee freedom of religion, conscience, language, education, and culture. It will safeguard the holy places of all religions, and it will be faithful to the principles of the Charter of the United Nations.
Sounds wonderful. Very difficult to fulfill. The sentence that I couldn't find the coalition for was complete equality to all its citizens with no and so on. How does it?
Irrespective of religion, race, or sex.
that unfortunately shows us that today there is no complete equality to all citizens in Israel. There's no equality between men and women. Women are still paid less and not have equal rights. There's no equality between Arabs and Jews, and there's no equality between Orthodox and liberal Jews and secular Jews also. So many of the parties in the Knesset that benefit of the fact that there's no equality would not sign today again on the Declaration of Independence. I am afraid a little bit that when you sit very far away from here and you see this, you will say, so, you know, get your act together and sign it and be equal and separate church from state and be nice to all the citizens. I want to say that I do wish that we will be able to get to the point where we phrase a constitution that is in this, following these values. I just want to say before I get to that, that I would ask us and you to respect and give a place to fear, because many of the people that I had very long conversations with about these values and talk about complete equality and all social and political rights to all its citizens, felt threatened by political rights of non-Jewish citizens, mostly Palestinians. What will happen if they will be the majority? Well, what will happen if they will take over great parts of the country? And I not only respect the worry and the fear, I feel some of it. So although I completely identify and I would like this to be what binds us all together, I also see the challenges of trying to realize it in a very uneasy neighborhood and situation that we live in. The last thing that I want to say or to suggest, if I can invite you to do something together as a present for this state, this 69-year-old young state, is imagine that we will reestablish the Jewish Congress like they did in Herzl's time in Basel or wherever they met in Europe. We should be reminded that Zionism and the State of Israel was not founded in Israel. It was founded where the Jews were. It was founded by Jews that don't live in Israel, by the Jews of the diaspora. And I felt it strongly when I was in the Knesset, and I feel it strongly as an educator. I feel that the voice of Jews in the world is not heard well enough in Israel, and that the Jews in the world don't feel that they have a right to have a voice in the way that Israel is building itself. And I am a great believer that, as it says here, it is a nation, it's a beit leumi, national home for all the Jews in the world in the state of Israel. It is not a state only for Israelis. And so I feel that unless we will find a place where, and today with measures like the internet, it's much easier than the days of Basel when they had to all get there with horses and carriages and trains. If we could find a platform, maybe a virtual platform in which this generation of Jews in the world get together again, physically or spiritually and on the internet, and talk about what kind of a state should the state of the Jews be, and how can we get to the place of maybe forming and phrasing a constitution that is not only written by the Israelis, that because of the coalition system are stuck and not able to find the common ground on which we all stand, but kind of widen the angle to a wide angle of all the Jews in the world and talk about what could be, can we get back to the Declaration of Independence and really build in the coming years a state that is with all the beauties, and I see a lot of achievements and beauty. I must say that living in Israel is a much more optimistic experience for me than hearing about Israel when I lived abroad. The everyday life is, I feel, a gift, something that I cherish and I appreciate very much. But there is a lot to fix and change, and this is very specific, something that I feel what kind of a state are we? What do we answer the voices that talk about the Jewish state in the way of a religious state? And they understand the word Jewish not as a nation, a peoplehood, a nationality, but a religion, and then they want Israel to become a strictly religious, of course, Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox state, voices that are challenging and, in my ears, frightening. So I'm stopping this part of my presentation in inviting you to somehow, first of all, I want to say that you are invited to have a voice, to be heard, and to take part in building this amazing project, in some ways miracle, that was founded 69 years ago, that is the State of Israel. And I feel that it is a project in which you have a share, you have a part, it's yours, it is your home. And I even believe that it could not be fully built without your voice and presence in some way. So, Yom Ha'atzmaut Sameach, Happy Independence Day, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing from you and trying to feel that you are real people there, and maybe we can have some kind of conversation.
Well, before we go to questions, I wanted to take a minute to continue to bring some of the atmosphere of Independence Day in Israel. We have a very short film clip, about 1 minute long, from the actual moment when David Ben-Gurion read this Declaration of Independence that is now somehow politically problematic. And if we could just cue that up and run this video.
זוהי זכותו הטבעית של העם היהודי להיות ככל עם ועם עומד ברשות עצמו במדינתו הריבונית, אשר תפתח לרווחה את שערי המולדת לכל יהודי ותעניק לעם היהודי מעמד של אומה שוות זכויות בתוך העמים. לפיכך נתכנסנו אנו חברי מועצת העם, נציגי היישוב העברי והתנועה הציונית, ביום סיום המנדט הבריטי על ארץ ישראל. ותוקף זכותנו הטבעית וההיסטורית, ועל יסוד החלטת עצרת האומות המאוחדות, אנו מכריזים בזאת על הקמת מדינה יהודית בארץ ישראל, היא מדינת ישראל.
Like standing under Mount Sinai and receiving the Torah, I feel that I was there dancing in the street, although I wasn't completely born yet. This is exactly the piece that, and thank you very much for bringing the film. It's very moving. It's on Rothschild Boulevard, And I also noticed there's one woman in the room. I want to point out two things that might be valuable things to read and look at. One is that there is now a feature, a film of David Ben-Gurion, an interview in English that he had, and the soundtrack was lost and only found now. I'm sure that you can find it, and it's a beautiful, long, hour and a half or so. You hear David Ben-Gurion with his jumper, like very, very cozy, very at home in English, and he's talking about his beliefs and life. It's very beautiful. The other thing is our colleagues in Bina, in the secular yeshiva, wrote a Talmud Israeli. This is the Declaration of Independence with a lot of interpretation, only in Hebrew at the moment, but if you want to use the Declaration of Independence, it's a beautiful text, and yishar koach to them.
Okay, so we now have a few questions to bring to Dr. Calderon, and so I will read them and I will give the names of the speakers. This is from Kathy Swerdlow, and she says, how can Israel move to Jewish pluralism when the ultra-Orthodox have been given such power? And in my opinion, that power is the antithesis of how Judaism has existed for thousands of years. So the second part of the question is a position, and the first part is the question.
Yes. How can Israel become more pluralistic? It's twofold. One is that I think, like in feminism and in any other revolution, there needs to be a lot of awareness by the majority of Israelis, Jewish Israelis, that are not Orthodox, to understand that they, for themselves, want liberal Judaism, and once they will feel it is important, they will talk to their politicians and it will become important. The fact today is that because there's no separation of church and state, and because they are religious parties, they have power because they are small parties and they can decide which coalition will be built or dissolved, and they are using it in a way that in my eyes is harmful both to politics and to Jewishness and Judaism. So part of what we can do is education. The other part is what I said before. I think there is an importance to the voice of Jews in the world to say to your politicians, and in that way to our politicians, that this is an important issue, and that Israelis cannot build a state that does not see our fellow Jews in the world, as well as, of course, all the citizens, the non-Jews as well.
Albert Cohn writes, in what ways do you believe that Jews outside of Israel can make their voice heard in Israel? So you mentioned something of a virtual Zionist assembly, but that's more the practical. I think maybe he's asking about what do they need to say and to whom do they need to say it to get that voice heard in Israel by Israelis?
So that's the million-dollar question. I'm sure that it needs to be done. I'm not clear about how do we do it. I do think that the virtual world gives us, and maybe our children, new ways or new tools. But what I think one should say is what exactly I know that you feel, that this state that is your home does not appreciate and does not respect all of the views of many of the Jews in the world. And this cannot be the case. The reason that it's still going on, from my experience in the Knesset, is that the politicians don't hear enough voices that say we are not going to take it, and don't feel that it will affect their votes. The minute it is effective, or there's a big enough group that wants it, it will happen. So how, I can't give exact ways, but every one of us has some politician that we give them voice. We let them be our representative. If your politician knows it's important to you, he will let the politicians here know that it is important. We all know that Israel and America are connected in a very, very deep and basic way, and in some ways, I guess the message did not come across. It's not your job alone. It is our work to do within Israel. But I think we should do it together, and I think the voice of North American and any Jews in the world is terribly important here.
I'd like to take the opportunity to ask a question of myself. You and your family are deeply embedded in the state of Israel, and you go back a long ways, and you told me once about your father was involved in the government at some point.
No, he was more in agriculture.
Agriculture, but that you're Israel is a young country, so people who were around at the founding of the state or very close to it are still with us, the way it's not possible in the United States.
Right.
So from your own family knowledge and the stories you heard, tell me a little bit about Yom Ha'atzmaut in the early days. What was it like when Israel was much smaller and it was even closer to the founding of the state?
Not even so long ago, but I want to share, I lost my parents, but when my father was alive, every Yom Ha'atzmaut I would come to his home, and we would watch Adlakat HaMasuot, the lighting of the torches together. There are 12 torches that different people are chosen to light for whatever, something important that they did or they symbolize. And it's a very kind of festive, like a big event with marching and flags. And you could look at it today and say that it's maybe a little too dramatic and nationalistic and so on. My father would sit there and he would cry a little. He was a sentimental Sephardic man. And he would say to me again and again every year, he'd say to me, Ruth Calderon, you grew up here and it seems natural to you that nobody chases you after school and tells you you're Jewish and beats you up, and that you have a flag and you have a national anthem. And you should know that when I grew up and in Bulgaria and they would chase me or not give me a prize that I won or whatever because I'm Jewish, and they had a king and they had a flag and I had nothing, I feel it's like I live in a miracle, that I am at home now and that we speak Hebrew. He spoke with a very heavy accent, but Hebrew, and that you are free and you walk the street and nobody will ever say anything to you because you are now the majority. That was always a very, very meaningful evening, and that was one thing. The other thing is that him and my mother told me about that night when it was a very tense night. On one hand, everybody sat by their big radios and waited for the votes. And when it was decided and when the declaration was declared, they all went out to the streets and danced for hours until morning. At the same time, David Ben-Gurion, that gave that declaration, knew that once he does that, the morning after the war will start and the Arab countries will cross the borders into Israel, and he knew that he will be responsible for a terrible amount of loss of young lives. And that heroic leadership moment for him to say, but I decided we will be a state, and with the whole story of how they decided on the text and they decided to do it, and they all came together in that place and somebody looked for chairs. It was all very Israeli, done on the last minute, and he came with a cab on the last moment, and his wife made him his cheese, and it was something like that was made 5 minutes before. But he made history. How do you say?
He certainly did. He
made history, knowing that the war will start, and the war broke the next day. And my parents were soldiers in the war, and there was great losses, and in some ways, so quickly you forget that very small Israel that thought that how could Jews run a state? I mean, what do we know of my father was the entomologist. He built the storage houses, the silos for wheat and so on. How will we do agriculture? How we will do sewage? I mean, we are always minorities that know how to build our culture and writing and so on. But now, when you are a Zionist and you live in your homeland, you're responsible for everything. And we are still working at it. It's not completely done yet, but I think there's a lot of beautiful, good new generations, and beautiful mix of people coming from all over the world, and I am very grateful to be living here.
Well, I want to tell you, Ruth, that in the household that I live in now, with almost the same scene that you talked about with when you were a child is repeated on Yom Ha'atzmaut evening, when in thickly accented Hebrew we talk to our children who have grown up here and have no sense of that larger greatness that comes from being in your own state. It's natural to them, and as it should be. So I don't expect more from them, but sometimes it feels, and I occasionally get a little tear in my eye as well.
To be sensitive to the people that are minorities next to us.
Yes.
Because we forget that very easily.
Yes, in the nationalist fervor of a national holiday, you can forget that not everybody in the country is like that. And maybe that's one last question, is that you talked about a Jewish and democratic state in Israel, and something like 15 to 20% of the population from day one has not been Jewish. And while there are, leaving aside issues of demography, the fact that there is a permanent or constant minority in Israel that doesn't feel all of those beautiful things you spoke about as well, how do we here in Israel and the Jewish world at large, how do we manage to build relationships when there are such different backgrounds and histories?
That's a huge challenge, because not only that they don't share my enjoyment of hearing Chava Alberstein on Friday afternoon, they can't stand it. They want their music and so on. I appreciate it and I understand it. I think like in every nation state, like in France, when there are minorities, if we would live up to what we talk about in the Declaration of complete equality and complete zchuyot, rights and all the rights that a citizen has, he could enjoy the fact that there is Jewish culture as well as having all his rights as Palestinian or Christian or Druze or whatever, Cherkessi, whatever culture he is part of. But we have a long way to go, because again, it's always bittersweet. The holiday of Yom Ha'atzmaut is a lot of joy and celebration, a lot of meat on the fire and eating a lot of meat, barbecue, and festivals. But the night before is the bitter, very tragic side of the loss of soldiers, and almost every Israeli has, either in the family or in a very close family or friends, some loss of a young life that was killed in one of the wars or between the wars. And that movement between Yom HaZikaron, Memorial Day for the soldiers, and Yom Ha'atzmaut, that now liberal Judaism and the Itchadshut Yehudit, the Jewish Renaissance in Israel, are building ceremonies of Havdalah, like we have between Holy and Ben Shabbat in the week. There's a kind of a moment of Havdalah between the sadness and the happiness. I think that is part of the reason why it is not quiet yet, and why everyone is so tense. And in my optimistic moments, I believe that it takes time and that we will get there. But I do see the challenge, and maybe we could have another national anthem that is not just Nefesh Yehudi. I used to live in Australia, and they had one British and one Australian national anthem. Sometimes, in order to be inclusive, you can have this and that instead of fighting this or that. It's not so easy when the country is so small. You can be much more generous when you have Australia. But I am optimistic.
Well, that is a great way to end this program. In a few days, it will be Yom Ha'atzmaut, Yom HaZikaron, Memorial Day, leading into Yom Ha'atzmaut early next week. So we hope we've given you something to think about. And again, if you'll pardon one last commercial before we leave you for the season, that again, this conversation tonight was just the beginning of the ongoing program throughout the year here at the Hartman Institute, where we will be not just celebrating, but thinking about and studying and really learning about the many anniversaries of the year 1917, 100 years ago, the Balfour Declaration, 1947, the partition vote in the United Nations, and of course, coming up in a few weeks in June, the 50th anniversary of the Six-Day War. Those will be the subject of our summer programs. Rabbis and lay people are invited to Jerusalem for them. Those will be the subjects of several day-long conferences we're holding throughout North America in middle of May in New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and Toronto. And you're all welcome to find out more information about those on our website. And we will have, toward the end of the year, even more on this subject with a new video series of lectures and study from the Hartman Institute's iEngage project, of which Dr. Calderon is an integral part. So again, I want to thank you very much for being with us. If you have any more questions that we can pass along to her after the program, please feel free to do so. And we will see you again, if not this summer, then in the fall. Thank you and goodbye. So there, you want to make sure that everybody, you see that